Motors is adding more cars to its recall heap. This time, about 200,000 older Chevrolet Aveo cars.
GM's biggest truck scandal just exploded, and it's worse than anyone imagined. Nearly 900,000 pickups recalled, engines seizing on highways, and a so-called fix that's nothing more than thicker oil and a new cap. This isn't about maintenance, it's about betrayal. So why did GM gamble with your safety? How many trucks are still rolling time bombs? And what happens when the warranty runs out? The recall... This wasn't a recall, it was a bombshell. When General Motors announced that nearly 900,000 trucks and SUVs might suffer sudden engine seizures at highway speeds, it wasn't just an administrative notice. It was the collapse of a legacy built on the idea of dependability. Imagine coasting down the interstate with your children in the back seat, the radio playing, when in an instant the engine locks solid, the power steering vanishes, and 18-wheelers close in behind you. That is not inconvenience, that is terror. But here's what makes this story different. It isn't just about mechanical parts, it's about betrayal. Owners didn't just buy trucks, they bought heritage. A Silverado in the driveway was more than a vehicle. It was family tradition, a badge of trust, proof that the machine under the hood would never fail them. For decades, commercials promised exactly that. And then, without warning, that trust seized just like the engines themselves. Behind the corporate statements and technical jargon lies a truth too sharp to ignore. General Motors knew. Engineers flagged the defects years earlier. Executives calculated the risks. And customers kept buying trucks that were already time bombs rolling onto America's highways. The recall notice wasn't the end of the story. It was only the surface scratch. What GM slipped under the hood as a fix tells you everything about their real priorities. The oil fix. Instead of redesigning the flawed parts or replacing engines outright, General Motors told dealers to pour in a heavier grade of oil and slap on a new filler cap. What takes less than 5 seconds on the assembly line was now being presented as a safety remedy for engines that could otherwise seize at 65 miles per hour. The official guidance instructed technicians to drain the original 0W20 oil, swap in 0W40, change the filter, and affix a cap labeled with the updated viscosity. Owners were told this would provide a stronger protective film between critical components and extend the life of their engines. On the surface, the explanation sounds technical but sensible. Thicker oil does create a sturdier cushion between metal parts, yet it also adds drag, reduces efficiency, and undermines the very fuel economy ratings that these vehicles were sold on. Customers who thought they were getting best-in-class mileage are now being asked to sacrifice performance to mask a defect. More troubling, engineers privately admit that oil viscosity cannot undo damage already inside the block. Microscopic debris from defective machining remains, circulating through the system until it finally destroys the bearings. In effect, General Motors offered a band-aid for a bullet wound. It might delay catastrophic failure long enough for some trucks to outlast their warranties, but it does not solve the underlying issue. For owners, the question became simple: trust the cap or brace for disaster. That oil cap trick may have fooled some owners, but the numbers don't lie. When you line up the data, the glossy commercials crumble. The numbers. For years, glossy advertisements have portrayed Chevrolet and GMC trucks as unbreakable workhorses, celebrated with trophies from research firms and endorsements from magazine editors. Yet when federal investigators began compiling complaints, the narrative shifted. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration logged more than 40 reports of sudden engine failure, including over a dozen crashes and a dozen confirmed injuries. The agency's engineers noted that in many cases, drivers had no warning before losing propulsion. The timeline makes the situation even more damning. Regulators opened a preliminary evaluation in January of 2025 after a spike in complaints. By April, they had expanded their probe to cover nearly 900,000 vehicles. Within weeks, General Motors announced a massive recall and issued stop-sale orders to dealers. This rapid escalation suggests the data was overwhelming. Even so, many consumer advocates argue the recall population is still understated, and the defect could affect well over 1 million engines. The dissonance between glossy award campaigns and hard federal data could not be starker. Marketing promises most dependable, but the complaints tell of trucks dying in traffic, and every fresh data point raises a bigger question. How long had the company known? Statistics built the pressure, but in the courtroom, the mask slipped entirely. Here's where GM's carefully guarded image collided with hard evidence. If this already has you rethinking what's under your hood, Hit subscribe to our channel and drop a comment below. Have you faced engine problems or recall headaches? The courtroom. A few years before the latest scandal, General Motors had already faced furious customers in the Siqueiros class action over oil consumption. Plaintiffs alleged their trucks burned through a quart of oil every 1,000 miles, long before the engines should. When the case went to trial in October of 2022, attorneys revealed internal documents showing that engineers had warned about defective piston ring designs in the active fuel management system. Instead of a redesign, management approved a cheaper cleaning process, gambling that engines would survive the warranty period. The jury sided with the owners and awarded thousands of dollars per vehicle, with damages potentially exceeding $100 million. That verdict established a pattern. Engineers identify a flaw, management suppresses it, and consumers foot the bill when engines fail. Marketing campaigns filled with golden trophies could not sway the jury. Instead, the evidence of internal memos, service bulletins, and ignored warnings told the real story. Owners who thought they were buying reliability discovered they were effectively paying for corporate risk management experiments. The echoes of that case reverberate now. The recall of nearly 900,000 trucks is not happening in isolation. It arrives in the shadow of prior lawsuits, showing that when General Motors chooses image over engineering, the result is predictable. Courtrooms expose what commercials conceal. Court records left questions hanging in the air. To answer them, you need to get closer to the engines themselves, closer than GM ever wanted you to look. Tiny flaws. The most frightening part of this scandal is how small the mistake really is. In modern engines, tolerances are measured in thousandths of an inch. A crankshaft or connecting rod journal that is only slightly too rough or slightly too wide can mean the difference between a healthy powertrain and a catastrophic failure. In the case of General Motors V8 engines, the crankshafts and rods produced at the St. Catharines plant in Ontario between 2021 and 2024 carried surface finish defects that could not be seen by the naked eye. They were off by only a fraction of a hair's width, but that microscopic imperfection was enough to break the oil film that normally protects the bearings. Once that film collapses, metal grinds against metal. The friction generates heat, the bearings scar, and debris circulates through the oil system. In teardown after teardown, independent mechanics have found scored journals, welded rods, and oil pans glittering with metallic fragments. These were not high-mileage trucks that had been abused or neglected. Some had fewer than 30,000 miles when they locked up on the highway. The failures are not random, and they are not the result of bad luck. They are baked into the production process itself. The deeper you peer into these failures, the more glaring another truth becomes. GM already knows how to build engines that survive. The Corvette proves it. The Corvette. It is one of the cruelest ironies of this entire saga. The Chevrolet Corvette, a sports car that lives its life at redline, shares the same fundamental small block family as the trucks that seize at ordinary highway speeds. Yet the Corvette's LT2 engine is not dropping connecting rods or welding bearings. Why? Because it was designed with a completely different set of priorities. Engineers building a Corvette know the car will be tracked, pushed, and punished. They specified forged steel connecting rods, high-grade alloy crankshafts, and a dry sump lubrication system with multiple pumps to guarantee constant oil flow even under extreme cornering. The difference is night and day. Corvette owners thrash their cars at 6,000 revolutions per minute without fear. Silverado owners find themselves stranded on the interstate with a seized engine while cruising at 2,000 revolutions per minute. That disparity makes the truth impossible to ignore. General Motors can build bulletproof V8 engines when it chooses to. The technology, the metallurgy, and the machining precision already exist inside the same company. The only thing missing in the truck engines is the decision to spend the money on them. If Corvette owners enjoy bulletproof reliability, why are truck buyers rolling the dice? Follow the money, and you'll see the calculation. The warranty. When you step back from the individual engines and look at the strategy, a pattern emerges. A full recall with new crankshafts and rods would cost billions of dollars. By contrast, telling owners to switch to thicker oil and adding a filler cap label costs pennies. That is the quiet calculus of the warranty clock. If the thicker oil buys another 10 or 20,000 miles of service, then many engines will fail after the basic warranty has expired. At that point, the repair bill belongs to the customer, not the company. This logic is not hypothetical. Documents uncovered in past litigation show that General Motors executives weighed options precisely this way in the oil consumption cases a decade ago. A cheaper mitigation that stretched engines past warranty was deemed preferable to a redesign that fixed the root problem. Investors like the lower short-term costs, but owners bear the catastrophic long-term risk. It is a calculated gamble, one that protects quarterly earnings while exposing families on the road. And when lawsuits do eventually arrive, the settlements often cost less than the original engineering fix would have. Warranty clocks and profit margins are one story. The image GM sells in their ads is another. Here's where the gap yawns widest. The awards. For years, commercials have bombarded American households with scenes of rugged pickups conquering mountain passes, towing horse trailers, and standing proudly beside gleaming trophies from J.D. Power. The phrase "most dependable" has become a mantra repeated across billboards and airwaves. But few consumers know how those awards are calculated. J.D. Power measures problems per 100 vehicles, and a glitch in an infotainment screen counts the same as a seized engine. A truck can win its segment simply because its rivals performed even worse, not because it is flawless. In 2019, Chevrolet was even forced to pull an advertisement claiming greater reliability than Ford and Toyota after questions arose about its methodology. The gap between marketing perception and engineering reality has only widened since then. Owners who see commercials promising unmatched dependability also see their trucks stuck in dealership lots waiting for inspections. They read service bulletins instructing mechanics to change oil viscosity rather than fix flawed parts. Each contradiction chips away at trust that took decades to build. Awards may impress on television, but they do not tow your disabled trailer home from the side of the road. And as the shine of trophies fades, the weight of lawsuits, regulators, and angry customers begins to bear down harder than any advertising campaign can withstand. The dealers. When a recall of this magnitude hits, the first people owners turn to are not the corporate executives in Detroit, but the local dealerships where they bought their trucks. Service bays became ground zero for the crisis almost overnight. Mechanics who normally handle brake jobs and oil changes suddenly faced trucks with seized engines, furious customers, and orders from General Motors to follow a vague oil viscosity bulletin. Dealership phones rang nonstop as owners demanded answers, while technicians found themselves with little more than stickers and thicker oil to offer as reassurance. The strain grew even worse when stop-sale orders landed. Vehicles already on lots could not be sold until inspections were complete, freezing dealer revenue streams. Customers waiting for new trucks were told their deliveries were delayed indefinitely. Anger spilled into showrooms as buyers accused sales staff of knowingly pushing defective vehicles. In reality, local employees were just as blindsided as their customers. The corporation issued talking points, but when pressed, most service managers admitted they had no clear fix in hand. For the men and women on the front line, the recall was not an abstract news story. It was a daily confrontation between promises made and realities exposed. The marketing campaign may still be playing on TV, but in the dealerships, reality looks a lot uglier. Service bays became battlegrounds. The regulator. It only takes a handful of complaints to light the fuse of a federal investigation. In this case, around 40 detailed reports of sudden engine failure reached the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration before the agency opened a preliminary evaluation. Regulators sifted through owner accounts, crash data, and technical service bulletins looking for patterns. The pattern became undeniable. Engines produced at the St. Catharines plant during a specific 3-year span were failing in the same catastrophic way, often with fewer than 30,000 miles on the odometer. The investigation escalated quickly. What began as a preliminary evaluation turned into an engineering analysis within months. By April of 2025, the scope had widened to cover nearly 900,000 vehicles. The agency's questions grew sharper. Why were defects not caught sooner? Why was the fix limited to thicker oil? And how many engines might still be on the road waiting to seize? General Motors had little room to maneuver. Once the spotlight of the regulator is fixed on a defect, denial is no longer an option. The recall notice that followed was less an act of corporate goodwill and more the result of regulatory pressure applied at precisely the right time. Dealers could only stall for so long. Once regulators caught the scent, the investigation gathered force like a storm front. The lawyers. Every mechanical defect eventually becomes a financial equation, and in America, that equation is often settled in court. The recall of nearly 900,000 trucks with potential engine failures created a field day for attorneys already familiar with General Motors' past behavior. Class action lawsuits multiplied. alleging not just negligence but deliberate concealment of known defects. Whistleblower memos and internal documents became exhibits, laying bare the choice to apply a cheap oil fix rather than redesign flawed components. The stakes are immense. In the Siqueiros oil consumption case, damages reached into the hundreds of millions. Now, with more vehicles and higher safety risks, potential liability climbs into the billions. Investors know it too. After the recall announcement, analysts trimmed profit forecasts, warning that legal settlements could erode margins for years. Shareholders who once celebrated cost savings from limited recalls now wonder if those very savings will be erased by jury verdicts. For General Motors, litigation pressure may prove even more decisive than regulatory oversight. Regulators can demand recalls, but juries can impose damages that reshape corporate strategy. Each lawsuit filed is not only a cry for justice from owners, but also a line item that accountants and executives cannot ignore. When the NHTSA applied pressure, another set of forces entered the arena: attorneys, investors, and balance sheets measuring risk in billions. The workers. On the factory floor, the scandal carried a different weight. Line workers who assembled engines and trucks felt pride in building vehicles that symbolized American toughness. But pride turned to unease as stories of failures spread. Union representatives reported growing frustration among crews who questioned why they were asked to build machines that management knew contained defects. Some workers described the ethical strain of putting together engines that might one day strand families on the highway. Whispers of resistance began. In some plants, union locals debated whether to push for independent oversight of engine quality or even refuse to handle suspect components. While no full-scale work stoppage occurred, the mere threat underscored a shift in the balance of power. For decades, labor negotiations centered on wages, pensions, and hours. Now, safety and corporate accountability were entering the conversation. Some employees spoke quietly about the shame of watching trucks they built roll off the line, only to later appear in news stories about breakdowns and lawsuits. Others admitted they stopped telling friends what they worked on, embarrassed that their craftsmanship was tied to a scandal rather than American pride. The scandal handed labor leaders leverage they had not wielded in years. If executives ignored safety concerns, unions could argue they were not just protecting workers, but protecting the public. That framing transformed a defect crisis into a labor movement weapon. The trucks may have been sold with marketing slogans, but the people who built them now had a slogan of their own: no more silence. Lawsuits tell one story. On the factory floor, workers tell another, and theirs could change the direction of the entire scandal. You've seen how deep this scandal runs. If you want the full picture and don't want to miss what comes next, hit subscribe now. We're uncovering more every week, and the next revelation could directly affect you. Broken trust. For decades, pickup trucks have not just been vehicles, they have been symbols of identity. Families in Texas, Michigan, and Oklahoma passed down Silverados and Sierras like heirlooms, trusting General Motors to build machines that would work as hard as they did. Breaking that trust is not the same as a faulty recall. It is cultural vandalism. When news spread that engines could seize without warning, many loyal buyers felt betrayed on a personal level. They had not just bought trucks, they had bought into an idea of dependability that shaped their daily lives. The consequences are showing up in resale values. Used car guides already list certain V8 models at steep discounts, with trade-in offers thousands of dollars below expectations. For small business owners, that drop means less equity to reinvest in equipment. For families, it means the truck they thought was a safe asset is now a liability. Loyalty erodes quickly when households feel financially trapped by the very brand they trusted. For many longtime buyers, the betrayal feels generational. Fathers who swore by Chevrolet now tell their sons to look elsewhere. Neighbors who once compared towing capacity now trade horror stories about seized engines. The collapse of trust spreads not just through households, but entire communities that once defined themselves by their trucks. Breaking trust with pickup owners breaks the foundation of the company's image. Once that bond fractures, rebuilding it is not a matter of a single recall. It can take generations to restore. When line workers lose faith, customers take notice. The scandal spread from the factory floor to driveways across the nation. Rivals move in. In the highly competitive truck market, every scandal is an opportunity. When General Motors stumbled, Ford and Toyota wasted no time in pressing their advantage. Ford dealers launched conquest campaigns, offering cash incentives for drivers who traded in Silverado or Sierra models for F-Series trucks. Toyota expanded its certified pre-owned program, highlighting reliability scores that contrasted sharply with General Motors' mounting recalls. Both companies placed targeted advertisements across the Midwest, hammering home messages of durability and safety. The electric transition also became a weapon. With Ford already pushing the F-150 Lightning and Toyota teasing hybrid truck expansions, the message was clear. While General Motors was busy patching old V8 engines, competitors were moving confidently into the future. The scandal provided them with a narrative tailor-made for conquest. Why stick with a brand hiding defects when others are innovating openly? Rivals also leaned on loyalty programs, offering extended warranties and free maintenance packages aimed directly at uneasy General Motors owners. Ford dealerships ran radio ads promising peace-of-mind miles, while Toyota sponsored community events in pickup-heavy regions. Every gesture reinforced the contrast. Competitors investing in reassurance, while GM scrambled with excuses. Every buyer swayed away from General Motors represents not just a lost sale, but a long-term customer gone for good. Pickup loyalty is notoriously sticky. Once a household switches, it rarely comes back. Rivals knew it, and they pressed the advantage ruthlessly. Once pickup loyalty wavered, competitors circled fast. Rival automakers saw an opening too big to ignore. Politics at play. Political leaders love a scandal they did not cause, and General Motors handed them one on a silver platter. Congressional staffers began drafting hearing proposals within weeks of the recall. Safety committees floated the idea of summoning executives to explain why defects known internally for years were allowed to persist on public roads. Senators from auto-heavy states demanded truth in advertising reforms, pointing to the gap between most dependable slogans and seized engines on highways. Insurance companies also weighed in. With catastrophic failures documented by regulators, actuaries began adjusting risk tables. Owners of certain V8 trucks found premiums climbing, not because of their driving habits, but because of the defect associated with their vehicle. That development added a financial sting to the reputational wound. Politicians used the rising insurance rates as another talking point, accusing the company of forcing working families to pay for its corporate mistakes. The hearings, if they move forward, could prove brutal. Lawmakers relish the optics of grilling auto executives under bright lights, with cameras rolling and angry constituents watching at home. Each question becomes a soundbite. Each evasive answer, another headline. Even if fines are limited, the reputational hit compounds. In Washington, image matters as much as engineering. By the time lawmakers began drafting press releases, General Motors was no longer just a car company with a recall. It was a symbol of corporate negligence and regulatory complacency. As GM's rivals seized market share, another group moved in, politicians. Nothing attracts Washington like a corporate failure tied to public safety. Driver's choice. For current owners, the scandal is more than headlines. It is a question of survival. One vehicle identification number check could determine whether their truck is part of the nearly 900,000 under recall. Consumer advocates urge drivers to take proactive steps. Verify recall status through the federal database, keep meticulous maintenance records, and report unusual noises or oil usage immediately. In the world of defective engines, documentation is both shield and sword. Some owners have begun forming advocacy groups, pooling stories and pressuring the company to extend warranties or offer buybacks. Online forums overflow with advice on compression tests, bore scope inspections, and signs of early bearing failure. For many, the truck is more than transportation. It is a work tool, a family hauler, and sometimes the single most valuable asset they own. Protecting it has become a necessity. Yet even as owners take control, new complaints continue to surface. Each fresh report suggests that the crisis may be larger than officially acknowledged. The company can issue statements, regulators can demand answers, and lawyers can file suits. But at the end of the day, it is drivers who live with the uncertainty every time they turn the key. Congress can debate and CEOs can deny. But at the end of the day, the next move belongs to drivers themselves. You've now seen how deep this goes. Hidden defects, silenced workers, and a trust shattered across generations. But this story isn't over, and the next chapter could hit closer to your garage than you think. Don't leave yourself in the dark. Hit subscribe right now, drop a comment with your experience, and share this video with anyone driving a GM truck. Because the more we expose, the safer and louder our community becomes.